All right, and we are recording. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon for another installment of Startup Grind in New York City. This time with a founder who knows a thing or two about leading the masses to affect some real outcomes. My name is Joshua Ness, and I'm the director here at Startup Grind New York City. I'm also a senior manager at Verizon 5G Labs, where I work with startups, academia, and enterprise teams to build a 5G-powered world. Startup Grind is the world's largest community of startups, founders, innovators, and creators, bringing like-minded and diverse individuals together to give startups everywhere the education, opportunities, and access they need to build, grow, and scale their companies. Part of being on the Startup Grind team means having meaningful conversations like this that address certain aspects of building a company and how to deal with the grind that goes along with entrepreneurship. We also talk to experts about the advancement of technology, as well as exploring barriers to inclusion and how to create opportunities for representation and allyship in the community. We're also excited to tell you about our Startup Summit happening Wednesday, September 15th. I'm going to go ahead and throw a link into the chat here. The Startup Summit is a half-day event featuring educational sessions, workshops, and high-quality networking designed for top startups in the global ecosystem, with additional benefits for Startup Grind startup members. You can get tickets using the Startup Grind link in the chat that I just pasted. And to be included in the exclusive workshops, you're invited to explore the benefits of being a startup member using the Airtable link also in the group chat. Or send us an email at nycteam@startupgrind.com and we'll send you some information. Having said all that, I am very excited to introduce my colleague, my friend, Dan Butchko from Playcrafting. This is where we're going to introduce the crowd roar and cheering in the background and post. Dan, how's it going today, man?
It's good. It's been a tiring couple of months since we just wrapped up our first in-person convention in 2 years, about a week and a half ago.
Oh, wow.
So there's been a lot of catch-up happening in the last couple of weeks.
Nice. And tell us real quick, what is Playcrafting? What convention was this? What did you do? How did you pull it off? Were you breaking the law? What happened?
No laws were broken. All guidelines were followed. So yeah, I'm Dan, the founder and CEO of Playcrafting, and we at Playcrafting represent thousands of developers, primarily game developers across the country. And we do a few things. On one hand, we do events which are meant to connect developers to each other, to players, and also to potential business opportunities. We do some education, so the developers in our network teach classes and courses on game development, the art, industry, science, business of games. And then the real core of Playcrafting as a business now is that we find exciting ways to connect big companies such as new technologies or broader consumer brands with developers in our network to create new games, new experiences, and that's resulted in over $2.5 million in funding to independent game developers across the country. And now also we've been making some strides internationally as well. So it's been a wild ride. And during the pandemic, of course, we scaled back from what was once 50 plus events per year, in-person events across 3 cities. And we just had our first in-person event in 18 months. It's called Play NYC. If you go to play-nyc.com, it literally just happened. So we don't even have the recap video up there or anything just yet. But that's our convention that we started to help make sure we were putting New York City on the map, since it is not often considered a center for game development, games culture, or games fandom. And so we launched it in 2017. We did it obviously virtually in 2020. And now in August of 2021, we just did it in person for the first time in a while.
That is fantastic. That is really good to hear. I've been to a few iterations of Play NYC, and it really is an amazing experience. You get to see all of the latest thinking in games and something that you've mentioned before, which is the power of play. I'm excited to dive into that in just a second. As we kick things off, everyone in the audience, please make sure to drop your questions in the chat. We'll be answering these throughout today's conversation. To get started, Dan, like you and I have talked quite a bit about what playcrafting does and about the benefit that that your model brings to the world of innovation as a whole. And you brought something up, and you've mentioned something several times, and I always thought it was just so moving. And it's not something that I've heard very often, and that's the power of play. And it sounds like it's something that you've been passionate about for quite a while. How did that begin? Where did you even start diving into this concept? Did you invent this concept, this power of play concept, or when did that begin to affect your life, and how has that nurtured you moving forward?
Yeah. So it started, I think, when I was 4 or 5 years old. My mom exposed me to the awesome power of video games, and so while a lot of kids growing up, especially in our generation, grew up and games were treated as sort of this subculture, something that was not to be celebrated or engaged with, or something you couldn't do at all because it was taking away too much from your studies. My mom loved the original Nintendo and got one for our family, dove right in, and I was just hooked right away. And to me, that was really the first taste of what I refer to as the power of play being. I just see games as such a great connecting force for people of all different backgrounds, ages, locations, regardless of what their belief system is, their political views, especially in the times that we're facing today. It's very similar to what you see in sports, more traditional sports, where folks gather together through the shared joy of entertainment and competition. But something that's so special and powerful about games themselves is that they are interactive. It's not just you are in that sport, but you can also be a spectator at the same time. And so there's something very unique about games in that they really put the power of interactivity and the power to sort of change the narrative in your experience, whatever that game or experience might be, into your hands, or onto your headset, or onto your phone. And we've just seen, in the work that we've been doing at Playcrafting, something that I really love is when a new brand or a new company is looking to make headway into the world of games, because games now are the culture. It's no longer a subculture. And so, I get so excited when there's a new brand or a new company that is looking to tap into all of this excitement and this culture of gaming, and to do so in an authentic way, because gamers are, can sort of smell a cheap cash-in or a cheap tie-in a mile away. And so that's where we really put the importance of the player, the experience, above all else. And we find ways to generate these exciting games and experiences so that they are first and foremost, serving the purpose of the player and whoever is engaging with them, but also creating positive outcomes for the brand or client that we're working with, and are empowering the developers themselves who are creating them along the way. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but games are just so all-encompassing nowadays, and there are so many different ways that games are changing our lives on a daily basis that many people aren't even aware of and wouldn't even call themselves a gamer.
Yeah, I think that's so true when you really think about it. If mathematics is the universal language, then I think another universal constant would be that everyone, no matter who you are, where you come from, always wants to chase down that gold invincibility star and shoot fireballs out their nose.
Right.
It's just, I don't know that there's anyone on the earth that exists who wouldn't want to do that. That's a throwback to my very first gaming system, which was the original NES in I think 1986.
Nice.
And oh yeah, it was one of those ones with the original the robot that spun the discs, and you had to move
Rob the robot.
Oh yeah, man, dude, I was a pro at that.
Nice.
Yeah. So how exactly did Playcrafting get started? This isn't the first job you've ever had, is it? I'm sure there are things that came and influenced you and made you realize that, wow, there's a gap in the market. There's something that I'm passionate about that I can do. Walk me through that journey real quick.
Sure, sure. So I went to school for social work and psychology, and my original intent was to emerge from school and go into direct client work in terms of, empowering and lifting up at-risk populations through direct service as a social worker. Through my experience at NYU in my internships, I knew right away that I was not cut out for it, and it was impossible for me to not take that work home with me. So I wanted to find a way to make a positive impact without, doing that direct service work. My first job out of school was at a nonprofit called Help for Children. And I was there for 6 years. We raised millions of dollars per year in the hedge fund and alternative investments industries, so basically Wall Street, to help fund the prevention and treatment of child abuse. So a really great cause, and sort of, again, taking that like these two puzzle pieces that aren't typically considered, compatible. Hedge funds, when folks think of hedge funds, they think of, greedy Wall Street bankers that don't care about other people. When child abuse is such an important cause, there was just a really great way to sort of marry both sides there and help empower, most importantly, the charities that the foundation was funding. I was there for 6 years, and it was great, but I hit a point where I spent one day, 5 years into it, and I made a list of every single game I've ever played in my entire life. I think at that point it was like 500 games strong. I had been reading about games, playing games, sort of like eating, breathing, and sleeping video games all my life up to that point. And when I made that list in my free time at work, I was like, okay, clearly that is my passion and that's the direction I should go to. So I left that organization, did some freelance graphic design for a little while, and said I'm not going to work full time again in a role until it's in video games. But I really wanted to find a way to work in the for-profit world, make an impact through games, but also still bring that community empowerment, community growth mindset that I had all along the way. And so a friend of mine had recommended that I join meetup groups and volunteer with a couple of places. I volunteered with Games for Change and did some graphic design work for their festival that year. And I joined a meetup group. At that time, it was called the Games Forum. And I walked in and I discovered hundreds of developers in my own backyard here in New York that I had no idea existed, showing off games that I had no idea existed. And so I partnered up with the guy who started that meetup and turned it into Playcrafting. And so, originally we started with a focus on primarily just events and education, but then once we started growing outward throughout the country and now internationally, we found a really great model here where we can connect, Fortune 500 companies with developers that don't typically make themselves available to them, who are on the front lines of game development, the cutting edge, and that's independent developers, so smaller studios, solo developers. And there's just so much great innovation and games and ideas and outside the box things that have come out of that kind of work in the past few years, and that's where we've really been charting the course forward.
That is really cool. Was there anything from your experience at Help for Children that helped to prepare you to lead this new venture? Was it helpful that you had a foot in both the funding area, but also the community empowerment world?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think the fact that at Help for Children, while it was a nonprofit, is a nonprofit, because the funding and the donations and the committees and boards were all based in Wall Street. There was very much a even more so than I think is usual in the nonprofit world. There was a very metrics based focus. There was obviously the core of it was to be raising money for this important cause. And so that's where I really got my first exposure to where, positive community impact and positive financial impact can sort of go hand in hand and enhance one another without exploiting or taking away from either side.
That is cool. I'm excited to dive into that here in just a second when we start getting into the world of corporate innovation. Um, to close us out on the past, how we got to where we are. What did you? I imagine I've run several meetups, and I've started from scratch, and I've taken over some others, and I know that I've learned quite a few lessons along the way. Was there anything that stood out to you as you were building this community, from essentially just a group of people who wanted to kind of hang out, and building into what it is today? Like, what are there any lessons learned, or anything that you thought was really interesting, or that you were surprised by as you were building this community?
Yeah, for sure. I think the fact that it started out as a less formal meetup and a gathering of folks really created sort of this challenge along the way, where as I was working to scale out these, big clients that we were bringing in, these brands, you know, it forced me to sort of look at it in two sort of buckets. On one hand, we have this top down sort of growth, which is coming from these Fortune 500 companies, these big clients that we're bringing in, but we can't in the service of that just neglect this grassroots on the ground community growth that we were building up for 5+ years before I even joined the meetup group. So that's where playcrafting is sort of uniquely positioned, and we have to really make sure that we are focusing on both of those areas at the same time. Because if we are only focused on building out our, bringing in clients and neglecting the community, then developer trust drops, developer communications and relations drops, and it's our clients are coming to us because of our ability to connect with developers, recruit developers, and work with developers to build out these things. And on the flip side, if we only focus on the grassroots community side, then it'll just go back to being a meetup group again, which I would love, and I'd still be a part of it, but I also have to pay the bills, and so do the people on my team. So it would probably be dramatically scaled down. And so that's where I think the unique challenge is, making sure that those two puzzle pieces are fitting, and both of those buckets are being addressed all along the way in ways that really can benefit both of them.
It sounds like you realized early on that you had multiple stakeholders who at times, I think, might think that they have different, if you were to ask an independent game developer, are your goals the same as a Fortune, let's say 25, one of the biggest companies in the world? They would probably say no, and vice versa as well. Right. But I think it sounds like what you're saying is you have learned how to aggregate the goals of both the developer community and from the corporate world, and say, no, you actually kind of want the same thing. And there are ways that you can work together to get the same thing, and that you've had to learn how to balance those two stakeholders who I'm sure even into the engagement might think that they're looking for different things, and to keep all of them engaged. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, we are sort of tasked throughout all of these different initiatives that we do with clients and developers to make sure that we are advocating for both at the same time. And we are there in place as an ally for both parties, sort of in every step of the way. We are being paid essentially to bring in developers, speak developers' language, listen to developers, hear their feedback, positive or negative. A lot of times, especially on the technology side, we'll be working with technologies that are brand new, like our latest client and partner, Niantic. That's an ARDK that is just now in beta. It's brand new technology, and so collecting developer feedback and making sure it's coming through in a constructive way that can actually inform and help the build out of the product as it's going along the way is super important. And then on the flip side, if a developer is not being paid adequately, or is not being treated with respect, or is being forced to crunch in some way that's outside of what their contract is saying, then that's another danger that we could fall into. So that's where we have to really hold the hands of both sides all throughout. And yeah, in the first few of our different partnerships, we certainly got like a who do you want me to work with? Like that came up a lot in the early days. Now we're kind of known for this kind of thing, and so developers know to expect these kinds of opportunities from us. And I kind of get like the weirder it sounds, like the connection between that particular partner and developers, the more exciting it is to me because like I said, I really think that games have just this awesome uniting power, and there are so many different ways for so many different kinds of companies and products and services to tap into games in authentic ways that like the further we get from like entertainment or like your more obvious sort of overlaps with games, the more excited I get because that's a specific kind of challenge. And so part of my goal is to find ways to have that question come up still with developers. Who do you want me to work with? Why? Because that means that we're doing our job well in helping usher, brand new companies and brands that you'd never expect to be doing anything in games into the world of games.
Yeah, I want to dive deeper into that. And it sounds like as you're mobilizing this meetup into a business, there must have been a huge hurdle in that you there was trepidation by the corporate partners saying you want me to work with a small developer, and there were like you said, there was also this hesitancy by the developers for working with those corporate partners. What was the initial reaction by these two groups when you were like, no, we can all play together?
Yeah, so it all started back in 2017. The first client work that we did was with the brand Schick Hydro, and they were looking for developers to make a few short games as part of their sponsorship of the Game Awards in LA that year, all with the theme of protect and defend, which was sort of their brand's mission at the time. And so by that point, we had already been running North America's biggest global game jam site for a while. And for folks that may not know, a game jam is like a hackathon, but for games. And so we just sort of took what worked so well in our global game jam site and just made sort of like a micro version of it where rather than making it totally open to the public, we sourced out and found developers that would be a good fit for this particular partner in Schick Hydro and essentially productized a game jam. That was the starter. And I think that like, I look back at that one and the few that came afterward, and I'm wondering how any of this would even happen in the first place because we're so much better at talking about it now. But so much of that process in the early days and even now it is really focused on education. It's really all about, educating the marketing folks, the decision makers at these different brands and technologies and potential clients on, what a game jam is or how game development works or how a game can be leveraged to showcase what you're doing. Many times that will happen for 3 to 6 months before any, developers are recruited or signed on to do anything. And so we still have to do that like with pretty much like a version of it with pretty much every client that we do. Developers are now, because we've been doing this so much, and a lot of times we'll have developers come back for multiple different engagements. They know us and for this specific thing, and so there's a lot of developer trust there. And so we've figured out sort of the best ways to make sure we're communicating to them throughout this process. What's in it for them? Obviously, there's payment, of course, that's a big part of it. There's exposure. There's the opportunity to work with these huge companies. But since we started as this on the ground grassroots community of game developers in New York, our style is not to just put a bunch of ad spend on a bunch of social channels with a submission form. No, like for us, we are hitting our developer network and the database. We are getting on the phone. We are really speaking to developers and translating what these different clients are looking to do into a language that developers understand and can really grasp. And we're there with them through that process all the way through the contract signing, et cetera, because all that's through Playcrafting. And so that's where, there's an education element for it for both developers and the different clients that we bring in all along the way.
Mhm. And it sounds like it's might be time for us to take just a quick step back. We had a question in the chat about the actual business model itself, and so, and correct me if I'm wrong or adding sort of details here that I'm probably going to leave out. Your clients are the enterprise organizations. You're the corporate partners who have some sort of a need for innovation that they're coming to you for, and you listen to them, work to understand their goals, and ultimately are able to suggest that some sort of custom gaming innovation program by where developers within your community are engaged to create new experiences that these enterprise partners, these clients of yours, can then leverage to engage their users. Am I fairly close there?
Yeah, that's totally right. So our clients are enterprise level, and typically what they're looking for is the content of the games themselves to showcase their products or services or brand messaging in some capacity. We also have, so there's a couple of different verticals there. There's the content of the games themselves, and there's also the developers who make them. So a lot of the work that we also do now is on the DEI side of things, where we'll work with clients who are looking to promote diversity, equality, and inclusion in the games industry or in gaming as a whole. And so a great example of that one would be the work that we just wrapped with Google Stadia earlier this year, where we recruited a diverse group of 40 developers from across the country to build out 10 prototype multiplayer games for the Stadia platform. And then 3 of those developers received additional funding and are getting published right onto the store.
Wow, that's impressive. That's incredible. As an independent game developer, that must be huge.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where, the deliverables, so to speak, that come along with these kinds of enterprise level deals are, of course, games and experiences. So that goes everywhere from super short form demos, prototypes, all the way to fully launched and finished games or experiences like Shave the Day, which is a game that we built and launched for Schick Extreme and the St. Baldrick's Foundation. But it also includes things like recap videos, gameplay videos, press and messaging, since a lot of these companies are looking for support in speaking to other developers or players and like the broader gaming community. We're basically, churning out a ton of content for our enterprise level clients, and the real like nugget, the heart and soul of it in the middle there are actual builds. They're builds of games, builds of interactive experiences that are helping showcase what they're looking to showcase in some capacity.
Mm-hmm. And what are you presenting? How are you presenting the Playcraft community as this value add? What do you bring to the table that these corporate partners can't do themselves?
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about this a lot, especially when we're thinking about who a competitor might be. There are a lot of gaming communities all around the world, and there's a lot of agencies all around the world that are working directly with brands. We're kind of both. We bring the expertise and the staff and the infrastructure and the experience of an agency, but then we have this massive network of developers sort of appended onto us that we actually pull from to build out these different games and experiences. Now, to my knowledge, there's no one like us, at least in the world of games. For a company that comes to us or a brand that comes to us that's looking to do something like this, it would take months, if not years, to build relationships like the ones that we have with developers, and sort of figure out the best model to engage with them so that they can build out use cases and whatnot for their particular needs. For us, we've been doing it. We've generated almost 100 games and experiences in the past 4 years for our different enterprise clients. And so we've just been like churning them out. We've been getting better and better at it. And along with that comes the impact for the developers themselves too. So, we're creating evangelists, so to speak, of the people that are directly building these games and experiences, and that's not the kind of thing that an agency directly brings, and that's not the kind of thing that especially a non-endemic brand or company has already built into their company.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine it's a lot easier for you and your community to pivot than it is for an enterprise company who might spin up some development organization within its ranks to build a custom game. I mean, having working for a Fortune 100 company, I can tell you how difficult it is to even get that set up and get funding, and be able to get them to be agile as they are building out these experiences.
Yeah, and on top of that, especially with a Fortune 25, Fortune 100 company, a lot of the conversation goes right to the Nintendos, Sonys, Microsofts of the world, where automatically you're going to hit a lot of roadblocks, and you're talking millions of dollars in budget to get anything done whatsoever. When you're going into the independent game developer space, you're talking smaller teams that are a lot more versatile and can sort of make those shifts and changes a lot quicker. You're talking much, much smaller budgets. Obviously, everything is scaled, so it's not like a one size fits all, but the entry level is significantly lower than going to like a AAA studio. There's a lot more room for experimentation, trial and error, real like genuine feedback, because independent developers are like doing trial and error on a daily basis because many do not have the infrastructure of a full-scale team that is where everybody is sort of siloed and only wearing one hat. So you're getting sort of this whole other layer of input and innovation and flexibility for a fraction of the price.
Mm-hmm. And so it really sounds like the community is Playcraft's biggest and best asset, but it also sounds like it is this engine that needs to be kept running, and it is constantly needing. I'm sure there's some level of attrition where there are some independent gamers or even smaller game studios that are ceasing operations or are going to do something else and are no longer able to be part of the community, whereas you're also having to go and attract new developers and new independent studios to be part of the community, and then also keep continuously maintaining the hum of this community, so that when a corporate partner has a need, you're able to tap into people who are ready to go. And
right.
That to me sounds like an absolute mind-blowing amount of work. So how do you go about keeping the community engaged? Like, let's talk like before COVID. Like, what did you do? You mentioned like 50 events per year. Was that a big tentpole of your strategy to make sure that these developers are continuously looking to you to show them what the next best thing is?
Yeah. So the events pre-COVID were very much our like developer relations arm, we'll call it that, where I mentioned the Play NYC convention before, but doing 50 plus events per year across 3 cities, we were hosting everything from demo nights to panels to local expos that were sort of maker fair style, where developers would just set up their laptops like in a shared space, and general public would just come through for free and play their games and provide playtesting feedback. That's I like to call it sort of pure playcrafting when we're talking about anything that is not reliant on a client for us to do. And so that is really the connective tissue that keeps us engaged with developers, or at least before the pandemic kept us engaged with developers, and sort of had the ear to the ground of what their needs are, what they're looking to do, what they're already working on, and also providing things like I said, play testers, opportunities for learning, connection. Classes are another thing that we had been doing in person exclusively then. Now, since the pandemic, obviously we have not done any in-person events. We scaled them back tremendously and used it as an opportunity to we did a series of virtual events, especially in the first few months of COVID. And we use that as an opportunity to bring in developers that would not have been able to be there in San Francisco, Boston, New York, these like hubs, so to speak, that we were doing most of these events. So we were able to grow our developer network into these new territories and connect developers to other developers in places that they would never have been able to connect with or may not have connected with prior. So that was like one focus. We did bring over our two biggest events, Play NYC and the Global Game Jam, to the virtual world. So we did do that. We launched our Discord channel and a few other things. But really in the past year, you know, especially at a time of economic uncertainty, I wanted to make sure we were getting better and better and better at bringing in these clients, because that results in actual funding and real world dollars for these developers and developers like them. And so now that we are sort of all teetering out of the pandemic, hopefully, we have really shored up our own, playcrafting team and staff experience and engine around how best to talk to enterprise level clients and leads, and how best to bring them into the fold and connect them to our existing developer network. So that's where, I'd say the last 6 months sort of went. And now Play NYC, like I said, was the big in-person return of events since COVID.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like leading up to the quarantine and the pandemic and all of that, it sounds like you had this, and I'm curious if you've ever actually written it out, like this whole collection of value-added services that you were able to provide as the organizing brain trust of being able to provide exposure, to provide play testing and user feedback. And even, I'm sure, getting some of the corporate partners that you may or may not even be working with at that point to get them in the door to even see some of these games and to maybe start spurring some ideas and maybe even developing some relationships there. So it sounds like there were some, as a way to, and I think this might be one of the takeaways for the audience, is that a way to keep the community engaged is really to think about what they need that you are in a unique position to provide. And because of your connections to not only the developer world, but also the corporate world, you're able to provide these things that other members not of your community might have a really hard time user testing. Like, there's only so many times you can post your APK on Facebook, get someone to download it, and then provide you actionable feedback on it. And it sounds like this is a way for you to streamline the process of and removing some of the friction for some of these other value adds that developers might otherwise have a hard time accessing.
Right. And the important thing to understand too is that when we talk about our developer network, this is not like a paid membership model at all. These are services, events, classes, events, not classes, that we are providing completely for free for developers. Sometimes there's like a super, super low cost associated with some of these events, but that is not our business model. That is our developer relations outreach. It's the way that we bring more developers in. It's the way that we, find out what's going on in the world of games on this level with those kinds of developers. And so that's where that sort of consistency before the pandemic and even now during the pandemic has allowed us to keep those connections super strong. Now, in the absence of in-person events, obviously, it also meant that we were missing a big feedback mechanism for us to hear from developers. And so we started putting more actionable surveys out to our network and doing sort of little snapshot tests of, finding out how the pandemic was impacting them, what kinds of brands they actually want to be working with, what kinds of technologies they're already using, so that can better inform our decisions when we're going out to different companies or answering companies that are interested in working with us. Because we are, while Playcrafting itself and our team, has a ton of experience and is really great at fitting these two pieces together, we're nothing without our developer network. And so we need to make sure we are adapting and changing alongside them and with them and in service of them. So that the clients that do come in, the enterprise level opportunities that come in for them, are things that they're excited about and things that they are interested in doing. Because if they're just doing it for like the check, then it's not going to be an interesting or exciting game or experience that they produce.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned events over classes. Events. You mentioned events and classes, but primarily events. And I'm curious, and this is just coming to me now. I'm curious. All of the partners that you work with, they bring some sort of new innovation to the table. Whether it's Niantic and some of the work that they're doing with their beta, or even Verizon with 5G. And I'm betting that that there's an opportunity for some of these larger clients to provide some sort of education or provide some sort of art of the possible workshops that these developers could start getting behind, so that as they're approaching new clients themselves, they can begin speaking the language of what future innovation is going to look like. Right. Is that something you've explored, or did we just nail on a new business model for you?
It's something that we have been doing sort of like touch and go up until now. When we talk about education at Playcrafting and classes and courses, it's been primarily focused on opportunities for aspiring developers to learn and to sort of get their foot in the door, learn how to make games in a specific engine, or sort of get the fundamentals. And those are, again, classes and courses that are run by and instructed by developers in our network. So it is another financial model there. And then from time to time, we have had our enterprise level partners come in and provide sort of free classes for a vetted group of developers. And that has done really well. And it looks like we are going to be doing more things like that as we move into the back half of 2021 and into 2022. So yeah, for sure. But I think it's important to make that distinction between education and fundamentals for active developers versus aspiring developers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so let's follow that tangent down a little bit. Like, how do you see yourself engaging corporate partners moving forward, now that like you referenced, like we're hopefully in the back half of this whole thing, and we can get back to having more in-person things, and we like your corporate partners are starting to think more about the different ways they're going to be able to engage their users and their customers, knowing that they've spent the past 18 months fumbling around trying to figure out how to do it virtually. That's not going to be something they're going to want to give up, but they're also going to have to rethink how they are engaging their users in person and live. And the entire nature of things like entertainment is going to change. And so I'm curious, how do you, moving forward, beyond COVID, how do you see your corporate partners using this community model for innovation?
Yeah, so one thing that we had to sort of COVID proof very, very early on during the pandemic was to be able to take the game development that we have been nurturing and sustaining for our clients with our developers and bringing it completely over to the virtual space. And so that's something that we focused on primarily in the first month, because we were also making an event and a showcase moment of the build out of these games and experiences for our different clients. And so one way that we did that is that, whether it's a paid game jam or, just direct like contract work for developers to be building out something, all of that is now virtual. Now, fortunately, we had already spent, 3.5 years doing those things in person. So we know how to do it in person. What we had to learn was how to do it virtually. And because our team is flexible, we're able to quickly go back into doing it in person again, if needed or desired. Right now, we haven't really had the request from any of our clients or partners to do that. But frankly, it's also cheaper to do it virtually for our enterprise level clients. Now, the thing that we've had to really focus on was making sure that it's still fun and engaging, because everybody has such screen fatigue at this point, and so that's where we have live streams to kick off development or close out development. So you'll like meet the developers who are going to be building something in the kickoff stream, and then in the closeout stream a week or 2 weeks or a month later, you'll get a debut and a first look at what they just built and what they've actually been working on. So we've had to sort of make that pivot. I think that as we're moving into hopefully a world where we can do everything in person again, we're probably still going to do a hybrid model, because there is so much that we have learned, and also so much more reach that we have in terms of the developers that we can engage with by having things virtually. We're doing game jams right now for Niantic that are in the US, but also across Europe and Japan. That's something we would never have been able to do in like 2018, 2019, purely in person, at least not that quickly. But we're doing it. And so I think that, Play NYC, the convention that we just did, while not a thing that we did for an enterprise client, was a great lesson, set of lessons learned for how we can achieve something that's exciting for folks that are there in person, but also how to best translate over, what that experience is like in person to the virtual space through things like streaming and live development or live playthroughs of games that are just being built out.
Yeah, I think it really is going to be interesting to see how the needs of corporate partners really start to evolve. Because we've seen, and I've heard of people who are looking for corporate partners, corporations, enterprises that are looking for gamified experiences for even things like return to work, and getting their employees ready for that, or even educating their customers on new business models. And so I think there's probably going to be an opportunity for you and your team to have your ear to the ground of where the shifting of the sands are shifting, and be able to communicate that back to your community to say, hey, this is where we're seeing trends moving. This is how the zeitgeist itself is transforming. This is something that you can and might want to focus on as you start engaging in opportunities to work with these corporate partners.
Right. And I think that obviously the world has changed significantly in the past year and a half, in obvious ways and not so obvious ways. One thing that I've been particularly excited about as we've been working with current clients and potential clients has been how much of a shift there has been around diversity and inclusion and equality. That was also already something that we were doing multiple kinds of initiatives here at Playcrafting for pre-pandemic and since the very beginning. But now we found really, interesting and powerful and impactful ways to integrate things like that into things that we're already doing, and also, helping folks who are looking to make an impact through games, but also marrying that with a positive social message. And that's something where, since we got our start as a meetup group, we were always very much about making sure that, whether you're a player or a fan or just a broader person who is playing games, that you're aware of the people who are making games as well, and how their stories come through in what they're making, and how their mind is applied to building out a specific kind of design or what their inspirations are. And so, that particular focus shift as a society has really sort of shone a light on something that we've been doing for a while now, which is making sure that the developers themselves and their stories, their viewpoint, their faces, their voices are coming through, even if it is something that we're building out for, a broader, Fortune 25 tech client and partner. There's a human element to it that we always had, and now it's becoming more and more important, so that we're not just like a game factory. We're not just pumping out prototypes. There's plenty of companies that are doing that. Many of them are like outsourcing to places far outside of the United States.
Yep.
We are also a place where people are gathering and are looking to make their careers advance and hone their craft and get their stories through in what they're building. And so that particular side of things has definitely evolved and grown in the past year and a half. And I think that's been a really exciting sort of silver lining to the craziness of the past 18 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that organizations are being more conscious about the people that they work with and making sure that different views and opinions and backgrounds are represented in order to reach their diverse audience.
Right.
As well as so I'm thinking about that as on the back end, and on the front end, there's an opportunity there because organizations are thankfully and finally becoming invested in educating not only their employees but their users about the importance of diversity and equity and inclusion. And I think what they're finding is that no one wants to do another Zoom call. No one wants to do another virtual class. I can't tell you, working for a very large company, everything is a virtual training, so that the company can say, yep, so-and-so ticked the box, they did the training, they're good to go. But I can see a world in which organizations want to offer their employees or offer their users a different kind of experience in order to communicate their values. And I think games are a great way to do that. Are you seeing anything like that start beginning to emerge?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's where the goals of the company and what they are looking to showcase in terms of their product and that social impact message can go completely hand in hand. And I love when we are finding ways to sort of achieve that. I tend to not say the word gamer too much when we're doing interviews or even talking internally, because the nature of who plays games and who engages with games has like really broadened through the introduction of mobile technology and the application of games to different areas and all kinds of genres emerging. And so that's where, whether it is the people that are playing the games or people that are making the games, it is really important to make sure that you are speaking to the diversity that is represented in that audience. And it's all about adding more people to the fold. It's not about taking away anything from the folks that were already there. And I just love seeing that. And it's definitely, as we've been talking to more and more of our clients and more folks that have been indicating interest in sort of making an impact through games, that has become sort of a cornerstone of what they're doing, regardless of what the goals are of the overall initiative. It doesn't have to be a DEI specific initiative. That's something that we put onto all of our proposals and our materials, that like, no matter what the goals are, these are core values that are important to us. And these are things that I'd say in the past 2 years have emerged more and more on the decks and the materials that are sent to us from whoever the potential client is on the enterprise level. That's important to them as well. So that's definitely something that we've seen more and more. And so finding ways to unite that between the content of the games interactives as well as the folks that are making them is really powerful to be able to thread that all the way through.
That's amazing. That's really cool that you are on the front lines of moving those initiatives forward and are giving both individuals and organizations an avenue to be creative about that, and not just writing a diversity statement, which is important, but are really exploring the boundaries of how to communicate values. I think that's really neat.
Yeah, and we're thinking about, even with Play NYC, we had a program as part of the convention every year called Graffiti Games that we launched with the first Play NYC convention way back in 2017. And it's really evolved to become this program that commissions custom-made games from developers from underrepresented communities. And that's where, as of 2020 and even in 2021, we've had the support of Rockstar Games, which people know for Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption. Like, they make like hard ass games, like really intense, often violent games. And so it's been very exciting to see Rockstar, join us in that mission and support developers like the ones that we're supporting through Graffiti Games. Again, in the service of obviously lifting up their voices, but also generating games that would not have otherwise been made. And so that specific program just created 5 games, short form games, of course. We're not talking like 5 Call of Duty games, but 5 short form games that debuted at the show a couple weeks ago. There's so many different levels of that we love to see, and it's something that our heart and soul has been in bringing non-endemic brands and companies in. But now, even within the games industry itself, we're seeing more and more interest because there has been a reckoning within the games industry too, on all different kinds of levels. And so finding ways to make sure that the game industry itself is also an inclusive, diverse space that is speaking to an inclusive and diverse audience has become more and more important in the past 18 months too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's great. To bring us home, Dan, what are some quick and dirty, what are some things to watch out for as startups and organizers start to reactivate their communities and user bases? Assume they're coming from a position like I'm coming from, which we talked about here before the interview of maybe they've only maintained sporadic communication with their communities, but they're still there, or maybe they've had almost no communication with their communities because they were exclusively an in-person operation. As we're all waking back up again, what are some things to watch out for?
Yeah, I would say be prepared for it to be like the beginning all over again. Play NYC, like I said, was the first in-person event that we've done in a very long time, and in a lot of ways, it felt like the first one, even though it was the 5th one. And that meant that we had to think about it in a lot of different ways. Obviously, it was a lot more work because we have to make sure everybody is as safe and as comfortable as possible if they're there. But we're no longer playing the game of like, let's look at what happened in 2019 or the early 2020 and like one up it. No, this is a totally new world. And so we are building new versions of what existed before, but it is new versions. And so I think like first and foremost, it would be don't set goals that are connected directly to like what happened pre-pandemic, because we are in a totally different world. And start with one thing. I mean, we could be doing 50 plus things again here at Playcrafting right now, but it made sense to focus primarily on the big thing that people know us best for in terms of events, and that was Play NYC. And really sort of start from scratch in a lot of ways. I'd also say this was definitely a lesson learned in terms of general public. We're in a world now where every event becomes political if you are requiring vaccination. So it is going to be harder than ever before already when you're like organizing communities, organizing events. You always hear the extreme ends of the spectrum, whether it is like, thank you so much, this thing changed my life, or like, go away, you're horrible and you ruined my life. Like, you're going to get more of that now because we are in such a charged environment. And in order to do anything in person, there are so many restrictions that you have to follow. Fortunately, in New York, we're a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of having those official guidelines on a local level in place. It's probably a lot harder in some spaces around the country. But safety and comfort are first and foremost. We had to redesign the entire show floor and do it in a way that was assuming that people would not want to be crammed next to a bunch of strangers. And so that meant like having less exhibitors on site, having less games playable so that we could have more wide open walkways. Like, these are all things that like we're following all of the guidelines we had to follow before. 6-foot walkways, 8-foot walkways, but now you kind of have to chart new territory and assume that even if everybody is vaccinated in the space that you're requiring them to be at, there's still a comfort level. People are coming out and emerging from this very specific and sensitive time. And the more that you can do to make sure the people that are there are comfortable and safe, the better. But it's going to be a lot of work, and putting restrictions into place that will preclude some people from being able to attend will generate a more political and polarized response than before, and will probably mean that you will have less people there than before. But that's okay. You have to start somewhere, and really it's about making that first new contact and giving folks something to get excited about, and not losing the fun and the power of in-person community along the way. That was a lot of the balancing act that we had to do with Play NYC, to make sure people knew all of the things that we were doing to keep them safe and comfortable. But nobody is coming to us for the news about the pandemic. They're coming to us for video games. So we had to make sure that we were really driving home the fun. Yes, it's going to be harder to get there because there's a lot of things you have to follow and checkpoints and stuff at the entrance, but these are the nuggets. These are the exciting developers and games that you're going to get to play. Don't lose the fun in that process, and don't get discouraged by all the challenges that are going to be coming up, because this is a totally new world that we're living in.
Mm-hmm. That's really great, man. That's some really great advice. I appreciate you sharing that. That was amazing. Thank you, Dan, for this incredible dialogue, and a special thank you to our audience for joining in. Dan, where can the audience go to learn more and keep up with Playcrafting?
Sure. If you go to playcrafting.com, you can learn more about us there. You can also follow us on all the socials. It's just at Playcrafting. You can find me on the socials at Dan Butchko, DanButchko. We are releasing our official recap video of Play NYC, I think, tomorrow, and we're going to start rolling out some of the debut footage of the games and experiences from our work with Niantic in the weeks ahead too. So come to us and check out some of the coolest things coming out in games, some of the best people in the world making games, and that interesting intersection between enterprise and the rock stars of independent game development.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Dan. This conversation has been recorded and will be available in the next few days, and we'll be sure and share that link as soon as it's available. We'll be back next month with more great stories from the entrepreneurship community, so be on the lookout for an announcement coming soon. And we're also thinking about how to bring the community together in person as soon as things calm down a little more. So that's hopefully something for us all to look forward to. You can find out more and view some of our previous interviews on startupgrind.com and searching for the NYC chapter, or click the link that just made its way into the group chat box. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.